Alright, ditch the epic sagas and horned helmet fantasies for a moment. Those horns are a total lie, by the way. Today, we're not celebrating Viking conquests. Nope. We're digging up 33 moments when these legendary Norsemen were, let's just say, not the sharpest axes in the longhouse. Brace yourselves for a dose of the dumbest, most absurd, and frankly unbelievable blunders, beliefs, and customs from the Viking age that might just short-circuit your brain. This is going to be wild. 1. First up, let's shatter the biggest, dumbest Viking myth of them all. Those iconic horned helmets. Seriously, who still believes this? It turns out the whole horned helmet craze was largely cooked up in the 19th century by a costume designer for a Wagner opera, probably after a few too many flagons of mead. There is precisely zero archaeological evidence, zero, that actual Viking warriors ever strapped horns to their heads before charging into battle. Think about it. How utterly impractical would that be? You'd be an instant, easy target, like a walking coat rack. Imagine trying to duck a sword swing, or worse, getting your magnificent but monumentally stupid horns comically snagged in a doorway while you're trying to make a dramatic raiding entrance. Or picture two Vikings accidentally locking horns like a couple of confused stags. It's comedy gold, but terrible battle strategy. The only thing dumber than wearing one would be believing they wore them. 2. Next on our list of historical head-scratchers, the very word Viking itself. We tend to think of the Vikings as this unified, monolithic nation of blonde-haired, axe-wielding death dealers, like some kind of ancient Scandinavian Borg collective hell-bent on global domination. But that's just dumb. Viking wasn't really a nationality or an ethnicity. It was more like a job description, or perhaps a very violent seasonal hobby for some. Think of it like being a pirate, or in modern terms, a really aggressive summer intern. Many Scandinavians were farmers, traders, craftsmen. Then some of these dudes would decide, you know what, farming is dull, let's go a-Viking. Which basically meant gone raiding, be back for harvest, assuming I don't get an arrow in the eye. So picturing every Norseman as a full-time professional pillager is like assuming everyone from Texas is a cowboy. Utterly, hilariously dumb. 3. Oh, Erik the Red, you magnificent, manipulative madman. His Greenland marketing scam has to be one of the oldest, boldest, and dumbest real estate bait-and-switch schemes in human history. Picture this. Erik gets exiled from Iceland for, Viking stuff like killing people, sails west and stumbles upon a massive, desolate island that's about 80% ice cap. So, what does this marketing genius call it to attract unsuspecting settlers? Icyland? Desolation Land? Nope. He calls it Greenland. Greenland! He figured, quite correctly, that a more appealing name would entice people to follow him to this frozen wasteland. And it worked. People packed their bags, dreaming of lush green pastures, only to find, well, mostly ice, rocks, and a very short growing season. The audacity is almost admirable, but for the poor suckers who fell for it, it was a profoundly dumb and chilly awakening. Come for the green, stay because your ship is frozen in the fjord until next spring. 4. Vikings were surprisingly vain, but their beauty standards sometimes led them down some truly dumb paths. Take their obsession with achieving that perfect, trendy, Scandi blonde hair and beard. How did they do it? Not with fancy modern dyes, oh no. They used a super harsh soap made with lye, a highly alkaline, caustic substance. Yes, the same stuff you might use to unclog drains or, back in the day, dispose of evidence. They'd slather this stuff on their precious locks and facial fuzz, often resulting in chemical burns, perpetually irritated scalps, and hair, the brittle, lifeless texture of ancient straw that had seen too many winters. Imagine the itching, the flaking, the sheer, eye-watering discomfort, all in the name of looking fashionably fair-haired. Beauty is pain, they say, but this was just painful, smelly, and monumentally dumb. They probably looked less like golden gods, and more like startled scarecrows with scalp issues. 5. Just when you thought Viking personal grooming couldn't get any weirder, archaeologists have unearthed numerous Viking skulls with something truly baffling: intentionally filed horizontal grooves in their front teeth. We're talking about someone taking a sharp tool and meticulously carving lines into their incisors, like some kind of prehistoric grill's craze. Why on Midgard would they do this? Some scholars speculate it was to look more intimidating in battle, perhaps by filling the grooves with pigment like red or black to create a terrifying snarl. Others suggest it was a bizarre fashion statement, a mark of status, or maybe just something to do on long winter nights. Whatever the reason, can you imagine the excruciating pain of having your teeth filed down without anesthetic and the risk of infection? It's a permanent, painful, and profoundly dumb dental decision, all for a look that probably just made eating apples a nightmare. 6. Superstition was rife in the Viking Age, but some of their beliefs were exceptionally dumb. Take, for example, the genuine, widespread fear that ugly or deformed people could literally curse you with a single nasty glance. Yes, the evil eye was a big deal, and if someone wasn't exactly a Nordic Adonis, people might actively avoid their gaze, fearing they could bring misfortune, sickness, or even death just by looking at them sideways. Some tales even suggest an ill-timed fart from an unfortunate-looking individual could have dire consequences. Imagine the social awkwardness. Don't look at Thorgil the Lopsided, lads. He's having a bad face day and might curdle the milk with his sheer unfortunate aura. Or worse, give us all boils. It's a hilariously dumb level of paranoia, blaming innocent folks for random bad luck based purely on their appearance. 7. The Berserkers. Those legendary Viking warriors who supposedly flew into an uncontrollable, trance-like fury, bit their shields, howled like wolves, and fought with superhuman strength, feeling no pain. Sounds terrifying, right? Well, the feeling no pain part was probably true right up until an axe, sword, or spear proved them very, very wrong. The dumb part wasn't the rage itself, though fighting naked or just in a bear skin while allegedly high on mushrooms or potent bog myrtle brew is already questionable life choice number 1. The truly dumb part was the belief in their invincibility. Sure, they might have scared the hell out of their opponents for a few minutes, but ultimately, sharp metal tends to trump howling and shirtlessness. It was less a sustainable battle tactic and more a spectacularly dumb way to skip armor day and basic self-preservation instincts. I'm invincible, ouch! Okay, maybe not. 8. Vikings were undeniably resourceful, but sometimes their ingenuity bordered on the hilariously dumb. Case in point, ice skating. But forget sleek modern blades. Vikings in some regions fashioned ice skates by strapping polished animal bones, usually horse or cattle metatarsals, to the bottom of their boots. Now, try to picture that. No sharp edges for control, no real way to propel yourself other than maybe poling along with a spear or just sort of flailing. Imagine these fearsome warriors, renowned for their maritime prowess, skittering and sliding across a frozen lake with all the grace of a newborn giraffe on a freshly waxed floor. Getting anywhere efficiently was probably a secondary concern to just staying upright. Resourceful? Yes. The dumbest, most chaotic-looking Winter Olympics event that thankfully never happened? Absolutely. 9. Forget rap battles on street corners. Vikings had Flyting, which was basically a formalized public poetry slam of incredibly creative and often obscene insults. And these weren't just quick, off-the-cuff remarks. Oh no. Participants would spend hours, sometimes even days, crafting elaborate, rhyming verses purely to humiliate their opponent. The topics? Anything from questioning their bravery and parentage to mocking their looks, their sexual prowess, or lack thereof, or even the comically undersized battle axe they carried. It was a spectator sport, with crowds gathering to hear these poetic takedowns, a gloriously dumb dedication to the ancient art of the verbal smackdown. Imagine dedicating that much brainpower just to call someone a son of a cheese-eating goat herder in perfect alliterative verse. Only Vikings. 10. So, the Vikings discovered North America, which they called Vinland, around 500 years before Columbus even learned how to tie his shoelaces. Impressive, right? Less impressive, and monumentally dumb, is how they apparently got themselves kicked out. While there were likely many factors, one delightfully bizarre theory involves dairy. Yes, milk. The story goes that Vikings, lovers of all things milk and cheese, tried trading dairy products with the local Native American population who were, for the most part, lactose intolerant. The subsequent explosive intestinal reactions from the locals, think sudden, uncontrollable, and widespread flatulence and discomfort, were supposedly mistaken by the Vikings for aggressive war cries, magical attacks, or just general hostility. This misunderstanding allegedly escalated into conflict, leading to the Vikings eventually packing up their longships. The dumbest diplomatic incident ever caused by cheese, and a profound ignorance of basic human digestion. 11. We all know Vikings weren't afraid to get their hands dirty, but this next one takes urine to a whole new level. They used stale, fermented urine for a surprising number of household tasks. Yes, you heard that right. Aged pee. The ammonia that develops in urine as it breaks down was a surprisingly versatile chemical workhorse. It was used to start fires, when mixed with a specific type of fungus called tinder fungus, to tan leather, making it softer and more pliable, and even to bleach textiles like linen to get that desirable paler shade. Imagine the designated communal pee bucket in the corner of the longhouse. Honey, is the pea pot full yet? The chieftain's favorite tunic needs a good bleaching, and I want to get that deer hide nice and supple. Gross, surprisingly effective for some tasks, and a profoundly dumb-sounding multi-purpose cleaner and fire starter. 12. Vikings had a healthy respect for the dead, which often veered into an utterly bizarre and over-the-top fear of the Draugr. Basically, Viking zombies with super strength, a terrible attitude, and a disturbing tendency to not stay put in their burial mounds. These weren't your slow, shuffling modern zombies. Draugr were often depicted as bloated, reanimated corpses capable of crushing men, driving people insane, and generally causing mayhem. So what dumb precautions did they take? They'd bury bodies with sickles to prevent them from rising, stake them to the ground, sometimes place a comically oversized rock on their chest, or even engage in elaborate rituals like carrying the corpse out through a special corpse door, more on that later, to confuse the spirit. It was a level of undead paranoia that led to some very weird and labor-intensive funeral practices, all because they were terrified of Uncle Olaf coming back for one last, very destructive, mead-fueled rampage. 13. Forget your credit cards and contactless payments. Viking economics had a distinctly choppy feel to it. They often didn't use standardized coins for everyday transactions. Instead, they relied heavily on something called Hacksilver. This literally meant hacking silver into smaller pieces. So if you wanted to buy something, you'd take your fancy silver arm ring, a bit of jewelry, or even a silver cup, whip out a small axe or chisel, and brutally chop off a chunk. This chunk would then be weighed to determine its value. Imagine paying for your groceries by snipping a piece off your grandma's heirloom silver necklace right there at the checkout. It was inefficient, incredibly destructive to beautiful craftsmanship, and a pretty dumb way to manage your finances. That'll be 3 grams of silver for the bread, sir. Mind if I just thwack? Take a corner off that lovely brooch? 14. Game night in the Viking Age could be a high-stakes affair, and not just for bragging rights. Vikings loved their board games, with Sneffatafel, a strategic game often likened to chess, being a particular favorite. But these weren't always friendly matches. With fragile egos, copious amounts of ale, and sometimes valuable possessions wagered on the outcome, things could get heated. Really heated. Disputes over rules, a particularly smug game-winning move, or accusations of cheating could, and sometimes did, escalate from tense arguments to actual bloody violence. There are saga accounts of games ending with one player burying an axe in the other's skull. Talk about sore losers. The dumbest sore losers in history? They're definitely strong contenders for the title. Your PlayStation controller is safe by comparison. 15. If you thought the Viking legal system was all about wise old chieftains stroking their beards, think again. When it came to determining guilt or innocence, they sometimes resorted to trial by ordeal, which basically meant letting God, or dumb luck, and an extraordinary pain tolerance, decide your fate. Accused of stealing a prized pig? No problem. The solution might involve you having to grab a red-hot iron bar and carry it a set number of paces. Or perhaps you'd plunge your arm into a cauldron of boiling water to retrieve a stone. If your hand healed nicely within 3 days, without festering into a hideous, gangrenous mess, hey presto, you were declared innocent. It was a justice system, seemingly based on who had the toughest skin, the quickest healing abilities, or access to the best medieval burn cream. Flawlessly, terrifyingly, and hilariously dumb. 16. Vikings were shrewd traders, and sometimes, shrewd tipped over into outright scam artist. Take the great unicorn horn swindle. Medieval Europeans were utterly obsessed with unicorns and believed their horns possessed magical properties. They could purify water, detect poison, cure impotence, probably even make your crops grow better. Vikings, ever the opportunists, realized that the long, spiraled tusk of the narwhal, a very real Arctic whale, looked suspiciously like what people thought a unicorn horn should look like. So they hunted narwhals, snapped off their tusks, and sold them to gullible and desperate Europeans for exorbitant prices, claiming they were genuine, all-powerful unicorn horns. It was dumb on the buyer's part for falling for it so hard, but a stroke of shrewdly opportunistic and slightly evil genius on the Vikings' part. Ka-ching. 17. Viking. Cleanliness is often touted as being revolutionary for its time. And it's true, they bathed more regularly than many other Europeans, typically once a week on a Saturday, which was even known as lagardaggur, or washing day. This was a huge step up from folks who considered water highly suspicious and bathing a dangerous invitation for illness. But let's not get carried away with images of pristine, spa-like conditions. Imagine that communal wooden tub after half the village, caked in a week's worth of grime, sweat, and who knows what else, has already had a dip. By the time Viking number 7 or 17 got in, that water was probably a lukewarm, murky soup of shared filth. So, while cleaner is a relative term, and a weekly scrub was good, boasting about it when you're the last one in, essentially bathing in everyone else's diluted dirt, is a slightly dumb flex. 18. Viking funerals, especially for chieftains and aeobility, weren't just solemn affairs. They were extravaganzas of dumb, sheer wastefulness and over-the-top theatrics. We're not just talking about burying important folks in perfectly good, seaworthy ships that had been painstakingly dragged miles inland, which is already pretty bonkers. No, they would then load these ship graves with an astonishing amount of valuable stuff. The deceased's best weapons, tools, imported silks, elaborate jewelry, slaughtered prize animals, horses, dogs, oxen, and sometimes, tragically, even sacrificed human companions or slaves, presumably to serve them in the afterlife. From a purely pragmatic standpoint of resource management for the living community, this was incredibly and tragically dumb. He's dead, Jim, but look at this magnificent imported Frankish sword and that pile of gold-inlaid drinking horns he can't possibly use anymore. Let's bury it all. 19. Long before Kilroy was here, graced every public bathroom stall and underpass, Vikings were the original masters of arrogant historical graffiti. These Norse explorers and warriors had a penchant for carving runic declarations of their presence, and sometimes just crude doodles or their names, into some of the most sacred and famous sites of the ancient world. We've found Viking graffiti on the Piraeus lion statue, originally from Athens, later moved to Venice, inside the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and even on other people's older rune stones in Scandinavia, essentially tagging over previous work. Halfdan was here, or Arnbjorn carved these runes high up. It was the ancient equivalent of scratching your initials into a priceless monument. The original dumb tourist behavior, proving that some human impulses for petty vandalism are truly timeless. 20. We often picture Viking explorers as master navigators, boldly striking out into uncharted waters with unerring skill. And sometimes they were. Other times, well, they apparently discovered entire countries by being spectacularly bad at sailing in a straight line. Take Iceland. Some early Viking settlers weren't aiming for some vast, unknown volcanic island in the middle of the North Atlantic. Nope. They were probably just trying to sail from Norway to the much closer Faroe Islands, a common trip. But due to storms or perhaps just spectacularly poor navigation and overshooting their mark by a few hundred miles, they stumbled upon Iceland. Land ho! Wait a minute, this isn't the Faroes. This place is huge and full of puffins. Oh well, new country, I guess. Navigation by dumb luck on a truly grand island discovering scale. 21. The Viking legal system had some, let's say, interesting nuances, especially when it came to really serious stuff like murder. Killing someone was generally frowned upon, obviously, but there was a weird legal distinction between a sneaky, cowardly assassination and a more honorable, openly declared killing. If you publicly announced your intention to kill someone beforehand, or if you offed them in a suitably dramatic, non-sneaky fashion, like challenging them to a formal duel, a holmgang, it was, well, still bad, but it often followed a recognized, if brutal, legal procedure. It could even lead to a settlement paid in compensation rather than a blood feud. It was a dumb loophole for loudmouth murderers with a flair for the dramatic and a good understanding of an incredibly specific legal gray area. I'm going to kill you, Olaf, just so we're clear. 22. Forget fashion critics and glossy magazines. Viking wives were the ultimate fashion police, and the consequences for a sartorial misstep could be dire. Like, you're single now, dire. A man could actually be divorced by his wife for certain clothing offenses. We're talking about wearing a shirt cut too low, exposing too much manly chest. Apparently, deep V-necks were a marital deal-breaker. Sporting trousers of a color deemed too effeminate, like bright red, could also land you in divorce court. And some sagas even suggest that having an insufficiently hairy chest might be grounds for your wife to say, "That skill ek vid thick. I divorce you." Imagine your marriage ending not because of infidelity or irreconcilable differences, but because your tunic was a bit too revealing or you had a penchant for crimson pants. Dumb wardrobe malfunctions with severe, life-altering consequences. 23. You'd think gods would be, divine role models. But the Norse pantheon? They were often a bunch of vain, petty, deceitful, chronically unfaithful, and complete jerks to each other, and especially to mortals. Odin, the All-Father, was a notorious schemer and oath-breaker. Loki was the god of mischief, which is a polite way of saying he was a cosmic-level troll who regularly endangered everyone for kicks. Thor, while a great warrior, wasn't always the sharpest axe in the armory and had a terrible temper. Freya, the goddess of love, was also known for her many affairs and her ruthless pursuit of what she wanted. These divine beings were constantly bickering, tricking each other, starting divine brawls over trivial matters, and generally making a chaotic mess of things for their own amusement. It's kind of dumb to idolize such a dysfunctional, unreliable, and often outright malevolent divine family. 24. If shouting your grievances at the Thing, their open-air parliament, didn't solve your complex legal dispute or matter of honor, Vikings had another, far more hands-on method, the holmgang. This was a formal duel, fought on a specially designated small patch of ground, often a hide or a tiny island, to limit movement and ensure a decisive outcome. The rules varied, but it was essentially a brutal, often lethal, way to settle who really owned that disputed sheep, whose wife had been insulted, or whose honor was more intact. It often involved a set number of shields, specific weapons, and could end at first blood, incapacitation, or, quite frequently, death. A rather dumb, incredibly risky, and very public way to handle conflict resolution. Can't agree on the property line? Let's go whack each other with axes on this rug until one of us gives up or dies. 25. Viking longhouses were marvels of timber construction, but some featured a particularly weird and dumb architectural quirk driven by superstition, the corpse door, or nagrind. This was a special, often awkwardly placed door in the wall of the house that was kept sealed or blocked up and was used only to carry out the dead. The idea was that the corpse would be removed feet first, so it couldn't see where it was going. Then, the corpse door would be immediately sealed up again. Why all this fuss? To dumbly confuse the deceased's clueless ghost, preventing it from finding its way back into the house to haunt the living. Imagine the inconvenience of building and maintaining a whole separate, ghost-baffling exit, all because you thought Uncle Sven's spirit had the navigational skills of a concussed lemming. 26. Vikings were hardcore traders, and one of their most prized commodities, besides stolen monastery gold, was walrus ivory, often called white gold. While narwhal tusks were great for scamming credulous southerners, walrus tusks were a huge luxury item used for carving intricate game pieces, religious items, and fancy decorative bling. To get this precious ivory, Vikings undertook incredibly dangerous and arduous voyages far into the Arctic Circle, navigating treacherous, ice-choked waters, risking being crushed by ice floes or frozen solid, all to hunt massive, tusked marine mammals. Think about it. Risking life, limb, and longship for what are essentially oversized teeth, just so someone could have a slightly more impressive set of Nefertafel pieces or a fancier belt buckle. That's a dumb level of dedication to luxury goods and a very chilly commute to work. 27. The Viking system of governance, the Thing, was surprisingly democratic for its time, but also a recipe for glorious, noisy chaos. Imagine trying to pass crucial laws, settle major land disputes, or make national decisions by having a massive crowd, sometimes hundreds, even thousands, of well-armed, fiercely independent, and highly opinionated Vikings all gathering in an open field. They'd shout their views, debate, i.e., argue loudly, wave their weapons around for emphasis, and then vote, often by clashing their swords and axes against their shields. The louder the clang, the more support for a proposal. It was probably deafening, looked utterly bonkers from a modern perspective, and one shudders to think how easily a heated debate could turn into an actual brawl. A hilariously dumb-looking and sounding legislative process. 28. If you really despised someone in the Viking Age, you didn't just unfriend them on ancient runic social media. No, you might erect a kneading pole, Nithstang, one of the most utterly bizarre, theatrically dumb, and visually grotesque curses imaginable. This involved taking a long pole, sometimes 9 ells high, topping it with a freshly severed horse's head, often with its mouth gruesomely propped open with a stick or rune-carved peg, carving nasty runes of insult and imprecation onto the pole itself, and then pointing the whole horrifying contraption towards your enemy's land or house. The intent was to invoke the wrath of the land spirits and bring ruin, bad luck, and general misery upon your foe. It was a spectacularly dumb, deeply superstitious, and incredibly metal way to express extreme displeasure and tell someone exactly what you thought of them. 29. Keeping up with the Jarlsons was a serious, and seriously dumb, business in the Viking Age, especially when it came to funerals. There was intense social pressure to throw the most lavish, memorable, and ridiculously over-the-top funeral feast and grave goods display imaginable for your dearly departed chief or family head. This wasn't just about mourning. It was about status, prestige, and showing off your wealth and power, even if it meant bankrupting your entire family lineage for generations to come. He's dead, but look at this incredibly expensive imported Frankish sword we buried with him, and that pile of slaughtered prize-winning goats, and the 20 amphorae of wine. Take that, Bjorn's less impressive funeral down the fjord. It was dumb one-upmanship from beyond the grave, ensuring the deceased went out with a bang, even if their descendants had to eat gruel for the next 50 years. 30. Viking nicknames were a whole art form, ranging from the fearsomely epic to the utterly baffling, the brutally dumb honest, or just plain weird, and you were generally stuck with these monikers for life. Alongside intimidating and cool-sounding names like Erik Bloodaxe, Harold Bluetooth, or Ragnar Lothbrok, Hairy Breeches, you had a plethora of real historical figures known by less than flattering, hilariously literal, or downright bizarre nicknames. Think Ketil Flatnose, Olaf the Peacock, for his fancy clothes, Odd the Deep-Minded, a compliment actually. But then you get absolute gems from the sagas and historical records like Eystein Foulfart, Ulf the Ugly, Thorir Houndhead, Ivar the Boneless, interpret that how you will, or the truly unfortunate and much debated Kolbein Butterpenis. Some ancestors were just savage, creatively cruel, or possessed a very, very literal sense of humor when it came to naming people. 31. Sailors throughout history have been a superstitious bunch, but some Vikings took their attempts to control the weather to a new level of dumb magical thinking. They believed they could influence winds and storms through specific rituals like tying or untying special wind knots in a rope. Each knot supposedly held a different strength of wind, and untying one would release it. Conversely, whistling at sea was often considered extremely bad luck, believed to summon storms or evil spirits. So, imagine an entire longship crew in the middle of a terrifying North Atlantic gale, desperately fumbling with bits of string, convinced that untying the right knot would make the 20-foot waves and hurricane-force winds just calm down. Or picture the captain screaming at a new recruit who dared to whistle a jaunty tune. A dumb, if hopeful, reliance on string theory and breath control for maritime survival. 32. Raiding was the Vikings' most famous pastime, and for a while it was a pretty effective way to get rich quick, if you survived. But as a primary, long-term economic strategy, brilliantly dumb, wildly unsustainable, and absolutely guaranteed to make literally everyone else on the continent hate your guts. Sure, loot was good. Shiny things are nice. Who doesn't love a good monastery pillaging now and then? But constantly sailing around, burning villages, slaughtering monks, enslaving populations, and generally upsetting everyone in a 500-mile radius eventually just makes them all, quite understandably, team up, build better defenses, raise professional armies, and dedicate their lives to eradicating your annoying pillaging backside from the face of the earth. It was a spectacularly dumb lack of foresight for basic international relations, sustainable economics, and long-term community survival. Short-term gains, long-term global PR disaster. 33. And for our grand finale of Viking-era dumbness, let's talk about their legal approach to accidental arson by cat. Yes, you heard that. According to some old Icelandic laws, specifically the Gragas law code, if your cat, accidentally started a fire that burned down someone else's property, the cat's owner could be held liable. Now, picturing a cat successfully committing arson is already a hilarious mental image. Was Fluffy playing with embers? Did Mittens knock over a candle in a fit of feline fury? The laws even apparently went into details about how to determine the cat's culpability. Imagine a solemn Viking court proceeding, with serious bearded men debating whether a small furry creature had malicious intent or was merely a pawn in a larger scheme of accidental property destruction. The sheer fact that cat-induced arson was a specific enough legal concern to be written down is wonderfully, spectacularly dumb. What a way to lose your farm. So, there you have it. Viking genius occasionally took a very strange detour. Turns out, even legendary berserkers had their epic fail days. History's full of them. Now let this rattle in your horned helmet, which they didn't wear. If these were some of the dumbest Viking things we know about, what absolutely bonkers, even dumber Viking beliefs or practices do you think history has conveniently forgotten, or we just haven't dug up yet? Let your wildest, most historically plausible, or hilariously implausible theories fly in the comments below. Did this Viking weirdness make you snort? Smash that like button. And for more historical, they did what? Moments you won't find anywhere else. Subscribe and hit the bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.